Welcome to our talk tonight, our discussion. Here's where we've been. Philosophy of power, look at that. Language, sex and gender, ethnicity, technology. Last week was money, tonight is marketing. And you'll see next week is institutions. So you Michel Foucault fans, get ready for that, but we'll talk about some other people too. And then I'm glad to say we're going to end on some empowering talks, talks about and thinkers and writers who can give you power instead of talking about how power is taken from us all the time. But speaking of how power is taken from us, marketing. So here are the etymologies. So marketing, we know, the action or business of promoting and selling products or services. Okay, here's where it gets interesting. To advertise, describe or draw attention to a product, service, or event in a public meeting, blah, blah, blah. But this is what I like. It's from the Latin advertere, to turn towards, to make you turn towards, right? And I bet if there are marketers here tonight that you would count that a success if you could get a customer to turn towards your product. It reminds me of Ishtar, who before her descent to the underworld turned and heard the underworld calling. Maybe it's the same thing, I don't know. Branding, of course. Again, think about the words we use with me, if you would. To mark an animal, a criminal, or a slave, just saying, with a branding iron, or to assign a brand name to. Same thing. Thank you, Wendy. All right, there is an ancient god of marketing. And there is. What are you laughing at? There totally is. His name is Hermes. Right? Am I right, Amanda? Yeah. Hermes, that's right. This guy is amazing. And there he is from the 1st century AD. Let's read from the source material, some of the source material. There's a lot regarding Hermes. First of all, he's the god of guile. This is from Hesiod, Works and Days. And Hermes contrived with Pandora, the first woman, lies and crafty words and a deceitful nature at the will of loud thundering Zeus. And the herald of the gods put speech in her. Okay, so here's an old story, at least in Western culture, of woman and deceit, but really it was Hermes who taught her lies and crafty words. And you'll see that's his bailiwick, that's what he does well. This is Aeschylus from the libation bearers. I think we might talk about Aeschylus next week too because of institutions, but may Hermes, as he rightfully should, lend his aid to Orestes in the slaying of the murderers of his father, using a false identity and guile to gain access. For no one, I love this line, for no one can better sail a deed on a favoring course. Sail a deed on a favoring course when he would do so, but by his mysterious utterance, he brings darkness over men's eyes by night, and by day he is no more clear at all. God of marketing. He is the god of thieves and cattle rustling, of course. Maya bare a son, Hermes, of many shifts, blandly cunning, a robber, a cattle rustler, a bringer of dreams, god of marketing, a watcher by night, a thief at the gate. This is a Homeric hymn. Here's another one. The god Hermes, after his thieving, went straight back again at dawn to the bright crests of Callene And no one met him on the long journey, either of the blessed gods or of mortal men, nor did any dog bark. And luck bringing Hermes, because he does that too, the son of Zeus, passed, I love this, listen to it, he passed edgeways through the keyhole of the hall. He passed edgeways through the keyhole of the hall, like the autumn breeze, even as mist. Straight through the cave he went and came to the rich inner chamber, walking softly and making no noise, as one might upon the floor, so he can steal all your stuff. Another Homeric hymn. This is Apollo speaking to the infant Hermes. "O rogue, deceiver, crafty in heart, I most surely believe that you have broken into a many well-built house and stripped more than one poor wretch bare this night, gathering his goods together all over the house without noise. You will plague many a lonely herdsman in the mountain glades when you come on herds and thick-fleeced sheep and have a hankering after flesh, you comrade of dark night." He's an infant. Hermes is an infant. Okay. "Surely hereafter, he's prophesying, this shall be your title among the deathless gods, to be called the Prince of Robbers." Hermes. Orphic hymn number 28. "Hermes, to rejoice is thine in fraud divine." He is the god of trade and merchants, and here's where he, of course, is more closely related to advertising. Orphic hymn number 28. "Hermes, with power, eluded all language to explain of care the loosener." He endowed all language to explain of care, he is the loosener, and the source of gain, blessed, profitable God. They say Hermes was responsible for profit and an overseer of the businesses. Consequently, they set up a statue of him weighing a purse, and that's what you see in the statue there. He is the god of language, learning, and crafty wiles. So if you've ever taken a literary theory class, and studied hermeneutics, right? The art and science of interpretation, you're studying Hermes. He's the god of speech, crafty words, and eloquence, so very much related to rhetoric. This is Hesiod Works and Days. Also the guide, Hermes, contrived with Pandora. There it is, I already read that, never mind. There's a whole thing from Plato about he is related by his name to trickery. All right, Hermes. This is Suidas from the Byzantine Greek lexicon, 10th century. Hermes. This is what they call a son of Zeus and Maya, which is mind and sense. For the word is engendered from mind and sense, Hermes. On this account, they also make him winged, as to be swift. For nothing is swifter than a word. And that is why Homer says winged words. They create image of him as the youngest of all the gods, because the word does not grow old. But they also make him quadrangular on account of the firmness of the true word. They also say he was responsible for profit and an overseer of the businesses. Consequently, they set up this statue of him. He also has a kind of Babel event. Men for centuries, this is Pseudo-Hyginus, 2nd century. Men for many centuries before lived without town or laws, speaking one tongue under the rule of Zeus. But after Hermes, also known as Mercury, had explained created the language of men, then discord rose among the mortals, which was not pleasing to Zeus. He's responsible for the many languages and therefore much confusion. So this is This is our trickster god. And we talked a little bit about tricksters in our Los Angeles series, but you can never say enough about tricksters. It's perfect that Hermes is the god of language, the messenger of the gods, and that he's a trickster, that he's a cattle rustler and oversees businesses, right? This is marketing, and I don't mean this as cynically as it might sound. You must, if you're a marketer, we do marketing here, you must tell someone your story that is convincing, and that is, of course, rhetoric. We talked about rhetoric in our second discussion, so I'm just going to revisit it here. There she is, Rhetorica, one of the three original liberal arts, along with grammar and logic. Rhetoric, grammar, and logic make up the trivium. And so here's Aristotle from the ancient world. Rhetoric is the counterpart of dialectic or logic or reasoning. It's the faculty of discovering any particular case, in any particular case, all of the available means of persuasion. So we persuade people all the time, or attempt to. And here's a contemporary critic writing similarly. Rhetoric is a mode of altering reality through words. A mode of altering reality, not by the direct application of energy to objects, physicists, engineers, but by the creation of discourse, which changes reality through the mediation of thought and action. That's a pretty heavy thing to do, is to change people through your words. All right, so the ancient root of all this is Hermes, it's rhetoric, and it takes place in the agora, or the marketplace. It means open place of assembly. It was a place for the ancient Greeks to go to be heard. It was a free speech area. It eventually becomes a market, because where people gather, you can sell them things. So there were food trucks in the ancient agora and tacos. I like to think, Here is Pausanias, his description of the marketplace in Athens. In the Athenian marketplace, he says, among the objects not generally known is an altar to mercy. Of all the divinities, the most useful in the life of the mortals and in the vicissitudes of fortune. But honored by the Athenians alone among the Greeks, they are conspicuous not only for their humanity, but also for their devotion to religion. And so it's a sacred space too, inasmuch as a public space can be sacred. And he goes on talking about the theoi agoroi, the marketplace of the gods. You see how easily that transition happens? Here he goes. There were the gods of the agora, the marketplace and the people's assembly. Zeus, as the god of kings and princes, presided over the assembly, as he always does. Athena, goddess of wise counsel, wisdom, justice, decay, justice. Themis, custom. Calliope, eloquence. The gods of the marketplace, on the other hand, gods of the marketplace, this is the gods of this assembly, the gods of the marketplace were led by Hermes, the god of commerce, along with Hephaestus and Athena, patron gods of artisans, weavers, potters, metalworkers, sculptors, etc. Apollo was there too. All right, it's in the agora that Plato begins to teach, that Socrates begins to teach, I should say, and that a young man, a young poet, Aristocles, heard Socrates speaking, went and burned his poems, and became the philosopher known as Plato, because he sat at Socrates' feet. The peripatetic philosopher, the walking philosopher, he would walk while his students listened. And Plato would go on to found the academy and become, well, the leading philosopher in the Western world, of which Alfred North Whitehead said, all philosophy is a footnote to him, and not incorrectly. He would tutor Aristotle, who would then tutor Alexander the Great, and philosophy spread throughout the world. But let's not forget that with Socrates, the first ironist, and with Plato, the first philosopher per se, who founds a school, an institution, is Diogenes of Sinope, who's there as well, right? Let's hear it for Diogenes, who was having none of this. He lived in a bathtub in the agora, and a famous story, there are many famous Diogenes stories. One is that Alexander the Great, when he came into power, had heard of Diogenes in the agora, and so he goes to find this man. Diogenes is related to the word dog, or cynic in Greek, and so he lived like a dog, just on the street. And Alexander wanted to know about this man. And so Alexander comes, and he's all decked out in his armor and his glory, and he stands in front of Diogenes in the bathtub, and he says, "I've heard about you. I run the world, but I've heard about you." And he's like, "I just wonder if I could do anything for you." And Diogenes looks up and says, "You could get out of my light." Another famous Diogenes story is Plato and his students are having one of their usual dialogues about what is man? What is man, right? I mean, it's a great philosophical question. You might also ask what is woman, but they ask what is man. And these eminent philosophers, Plato and his students in the first school, the academy, come to the conclusion that man is a featherless biped. Because this is what you get from academic philosophy. Conclusions like that. The true philosopher, or I should say the better philosopher, Diogenes, finds a chicken, plucks it, throws it into the academy and says, "Ecce homo, behold the man." All this is happening in the agora, right? That's where you want to be, is in the agora. And of course, just for a free little factotum, this is where we get agoraphobia, fear of open spaces. So if you weren't in the agora in Athens, you were in your domicile. So there's a great sculpture in Chicago by a Polish artist. All right, what else happens in terms of marketing before marketing? And we're going to get to marketing per se. Proselytizing. How is this not marketing? You remember that film, right? Leap of Faith, yeah. So again, Greek pros, toward, and to come, erkomai, to come toward, to bring someone toward you. That's marketing, right? It's the same thing. To proselytize. And actually, it was a Buddhist emperor who was really known for this first, is Asoka, who really is responsible for the spread of Buddhism outside of India. And, we hear proselytizing and we think evangelizing because we're here in the West, but this was a more subtle form of proselytizing. He would build infrastructure for the peoples he conquered and then introduce them to Buddhism. But it was never under compulsion or anything like that. It is and he would have conferences and he'd have discussions about Hinduism and Buddhism. So it was a really interesting approach that worked. So the reason there is Buddhism in Thailand and Laos and Vietnam and ultimately China and Japan is because of this proselytizer named Ashoka. Now, of course, we think of Christianity because we're here, and we've probably had experience with proselytizing or evangelizing by Christians, and this comes right out of the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus gives what's called the Great Commission, where he gathers his disciples and he says, well, the text reads this: "Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee," because Judas is gone, "to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, They worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. And remember, I'm with you always to the end of the age. So whenever you encounter a missionary in sub-Saharan Africa or in Asia, China, wherever, a Christian missionary will refer you to this verse. As we saw last week, they won't refer you to the verse that says, don't take any money with you when you go. Don't take anything with you. Don't take a bedroll or anything. But that's okay. There's a lot in the Bible. You may know that Islam was a proselytizing religion. I think we could say they made people come to them, but in unique ways, sometimes through war and conquering. But we should always remember the second surah, there is no compulsion in Islam, says the Quran. Truly, the right way has become clearly distinct from error. Therefore, whoever disbelieves has indeed, and believes in, disbelieves in shaitan and believes in Allah, he indeed has laid hold onto the firmest handle, which shall not break off. And Allah is hearing and knowing. And so the Quranic interpretation of proselytizing is anything that's done through compulsion is not really done right or well and doesn't last. Now, this is a huge, enormous religion with a wide arc of history, and so there was compulsion. When you take over someone's land and you are of a certain religion, there's a certain compulsion built in. But still, from another surah, you shall invite to the path of your Lord with wisdom and kind enlightenment, from the Quran, and debate with them in the best possible manner. Your Lord knows best who has strayed from his path, and he knows best who are the guided ones. Again, from the Quran, you shall invite to the path of your Lord with wisdom and kind enlightenment, and debate with them in the best possible manner. All right. Now, of course, evangelism is now actually it's a position in tech companies and has been for decades now. I think one of the first ones was for IBM. The guy was hired as an evangelist. You may know, if you know this guy Kawasaki, was hired by Apple. His title was chief evangelist. Oh, okay, yeah. So you'll see, if you look at the boards of tech companies, you will often see the title evangelist, to spread the good news. That's what evangel means. And so now it's a marketing position, evangelicalism. We can talk about that if you like, because there's much to say, I think. It's interesting, just here's one thing we could say. Where else do you get to in the public sphere, do you get to advocate a position without any sense of being persuaded to some other position, right? Politics, religion, and marketing, right? And so you're engaging in debate, but not to be persuaded, but only to persuade. So it's not dialogue, it's marketing. We've mentioned, I know Blake has mentioned, and Liz has before, Edward Bernays. So we're now coming up from Hermes in the ancient world to the contemporary world. Edward Bernays was Sigmund Freud's nephew, a fact which he liked to put out there upon meeting someone for the first time. He was not shy, shall we say, about being Sigmund Freud's nephew. And in fact, Freud did send him some cigars along with one of his own books. I think it was New Introductory Lectures on Psychoanalysis, and Bernays read it, and it changed his life, and it changed yours. Because Bernays took Freud's theories, and we are living with the results now. He wrote a book called Propaganda in 1928, Bernays did, and this is what he said. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of the country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes are formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men, and here the gender is right, we have never heard of. It is they who pull the wires that control the public mind. So that's 1928. He creates the very notion of public relations. In fact, he decides propaganda is a little too charged a term, and so like a good brander, he changes the brand. And plus, the National Socialists are coming to power in Germany right now, so propaganda gets a whole new use. And so he calls it instead. Now, it's important to remember this. He just changes the words, public relations, right? This is the birth of madmen, right? Edward Bernays. He says this, no serious sociologist any longer believes in that the voice of the people expresses any divine or especially wise or lofty idea. The voice of the people, vox populi, expresses the mind of the people, all right? And that mind is made up for it by the group leaders in whom it believes. Let me say that again. The voice of the people expresses the mind of the people, and that mind is made up for it by group leaders. I think that's a lovely, inert, non-threatening term. Group leaders, like you're at camp, in whom it believes, and we always believe. And by those persons who understand the manipulation of public opinion. Have you met me? My name is Edward Bernays, and he made a fortune, by the way. It is composed, he continues, of inherited prejudices. This is the mind of the people. It is composed of inherited prejudices and symbols and cliches and verbal formulas supplied to them by the leaders. The mind of the people. Now, we here would call that mythology. But whatever, it's the same thing. Inherited prejudices, symbols, right, especially, cliches and verbal formulas supplied to them by the leaders. All right, so the genius and the horror of Edward Bernays is that he took his uncle's work and he bypassed rhetoric. He said, forget about rhetoric, but certainly forget about philosophy and reason. That I can't get through that. Forget about rhetoric, forget about persuasion. I want to tap into your unconscious desires so that you don't have the ego, which operates according to the reality principle. I'm going to go right past that, right to the id, right? Well, what are you going to do if something's tapping into your id? Not much. You're going to obey, right? And this is what he did. And again, we're all under this right now. I mean, I'm not doing it. So we go from vox populi, the voice of the people, to the saying, the voice of the people is the voice of God? Vox populi, vox Dei. To vox populi, vox manipulator. Right? Yeah, Paul.
Just a quick note that there's an amazing documentary.
You mean this one?
Yeah. Oh, wow. It's called Century of the Self by I didn't read that part. Yeah. No.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. No, this is a clip from it.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, so exactly. This is a Century of the Self. This is a section, an episode called Happiness Machines about Edward Bernays. It's about an hour, and Paul's right. It's brilliant and chilling. Adam Curtis, who is an amazing documentarian, and has a relatively new one out called Hypernormality. What is it?
Hypernormalization.
Thank you, hypernormalization. So here's just a little excerpt, a little scene from the documentary called Torches of Freedom, and I'll let it speak for itself.
Since the end of the 19th century, America had become a mass industrial society, with millions clustered together in the cities. Bernays was determined to find a way to manage and alter the way these new crowds thought and felt. To do this, he turned to the writings of his uncle Sigmund. While in Paris, Bernays had sent his uncle a gift of some Havana cigars. In return, Freud had sent him a copy of his General Introduction to Psychoanalysis. Bernays read it, and the picture of hidden irrational forces inside human beings fascinated him. He wondered whether he might make money by manipulating the unconscious. Bernays set out to experiment with the minds of the popular classes. His most dramatic experiment was to persuade women to smoke. At that time, there was a taboo against women smoking, and one of his early clients, George Hill, the president of the American Tobacco Corporation, asked Bernays to find a way of breaking it. A. Brill was one of the first psychoanalysts in America, and for a large fee, he told Bernays that cigarettes were a symbol of the penis and of male sexual power. He told Bernays that if he could find a way to connect cigarettes with the idea of challenging male power, then women would smoke, because then they would have their own penises. Every year, New York held an Easter Day parade to which thousands came, and Bernays decided to stage an event there. He persuaded a group of rich debutantes to hide cigarettes under their clothes. Then they should join the parade, and at a given signal from him, they were to light up the cigarettes dramatically. Bernays then informed the press that he had heard that a group of suffragettes were preparing to protest by lighting up what they called torches of freedom.
He knew this would be an outcry, and he knew that all of the photographers would be there to capture this moment. And so he was ready with a phrase which was torches of freedom. And so here you have a symbol, women, young women, debutantes, smoking a cigarette in public with a phrase that means anybody who believes in this kind of equality pretty much has to support them in the ensuing debate about this, because torches of freedom. I mean, what's on all American coins? It's liberty. She's holding up the torch, you see? And so all of this is there together. There's emotion, there's memory, there's a rational phrase, even though it's using a lot of emotional elements. It's a phrase that works in a rational sense. All of this is together. And so the next day, this was not just in all of the New York papers, it was across the United States and around the world. And from that point forward, the sale of cigarettes to women began to rise. He had made them socially acceptable with a single symbolic act.
What Bernays had created was the idea that if a woman smoked, it made her more powerful and independent, an idea that still persists today.
Embrace me, my sweet embrace.
It made him realize that it was possible to persuade people to behave irrationally if you link products to their emotional desires and feelings. The idea that smoking actually made women freer was completely irrational, but it made them feel more independent. It meant that irrelevant objects could become powerful emotional symbols of how you wanted to be seen by others.
Eddie Bernays saw the way to sell product was not to sell it to your intellect, that you ought to buy an automobile, but that you will feel better about it. if you have this automobile. I think he originated that idea, that they weren't just purchasing something, but they were engaging themselves emotionally or personally in the product or service. That it's not, you think you need a new piece of clothing, but you'll feel better with the piece of clothing. That was his contribution in a very real sense. We see it all over the place today, but I think he originated the idea of the emotional connect to a product or service.
Now, I would just say, as we knowingly laugh, and for good reason, at torches of freedom, which we do not allow, by the way. We prohibit torches of freedom here on campus. That there are forces at work on us that people maybe decades from now will look back at us and laugh. I'm looking at you, Twitter and Facebook maybe, I don't know. These forces, again, go right past your screening, your intellectual and your ego screening. And so you don't know that they're working on you. Or you may have a faint hint that they're working on you, but it doesn't stop you, because it's no longer about rationality. It's no longer about reality. It's about how it makes me feel. And again, as we look back through history past 1960, when Bernays was especially active, the creation of the Mad Men phenomenon, people, I know this may be hard to imagine, but people did not buy things unless they needed them. I know, take a moment. They really didn't. I was an accident in my family, and so my parents were quite older, and so I can remember this, where our great treat, it was almost an extravagance. This is a small town in the South, and it was, I could tell my parents were a little uneasy about it, but one day a week we went to McDonald's, because that was eating out. That was lavish, right? Because every other time you would be at home making your meals. And you didn't buy cars for how they looked, you bought them for how long they lasted. Same thing with clothes, same thing with everything else. And this was humanity, even in the Western world, up until about 1960, until Bernays and this innovation, and this Freudian innovation in marketing. So this is all relatively recent, what you feel about purchasing and marketing and Hermes, the god of the market. It's all relatively recent. Now, someone who nailed this was a French philosopher, neo-Marxist, named Guy Debord. He lived from 1931 to 1994 and founded a kind of art publishing group called La Société in 1967, and said that capitalism's main technology was the production of spectacle, which includes, well, whose purpose is distraction and pacification. Sound familiar? Distraction and pacification. He calls it the hyper-reality, or actually I'm calling it that, a hyper-reality of commodified fragments with only surfaces. What am I saying? It's an unreality of pieces of things that we all share that has no depth. Again, I'm looking at you, Facebook and Twitter, but not just those things. Right? Commodified, meaning it's sold in mass, fragments, it's not whole, and surface only. There's no depth to it. Right? There's nothing beyond it. Society of the Spectacle is 9 chapters with 221 theses. I love this because I think he's trying to evoke Martin Luther's 95 Theses, the great Lutheran, who nailed his theses on the door of the church in Wittenberg, Germany, to announce the Protestant Reformation. Debord will not have such grand aspirations, though. In fact, we'll talk about how he ends up. But let me give you a sense of Society of the Spectacle from G. Debord. See if this rings true for you today, after Bernays. In societies where modern conditions of production prevail, in capitalism, all of life presents itself as an immense accumulation of spectacles. Everything that was directly lived has moved away into representation. If you don't believe me, believe Debord, search for Society of the Spectacle, and you'll see there's an eyeglass store named for that. Spectacle, and if you know your Jean Baudrillard, you'll recognize this, although this is before Baudrillard. Spectacle, he says, presents itself simultaneously as all of society, as a part of society, and as an instrument of unification. You're on Facebook, right? All of society. And a part of society, you have your own circle, and an instrument of unification. I left Facebook in, I think it was 2012, and people wrote to me and said, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Well, you're not on Facebook." I'm like, "Right, but I'm here. You're talking to me." They're like, "Well, I thought something happened." And I said, "Something did. I left Facebook." Really interesting. I had left society by not being on Facebook, you see. And they genuinely thought part of my existence was gone. They're like, but they kind of got pissed at me. Like, "Well, how are we supposed to know you're okay?" And I'm like, "Well, how are you talking to me right now? We're not using Facebook. We're using a phone or a text or an email." Anyway, the spectacle presents itself as all of society, part of society, and an instrument of unification. So don't forget, the rhetoric of marketing is unification. You can have this. You can be a part of this. He continues, as a part of society is specifically the sector which concentrates all gazing, and all consciousness, all awareness, your conscious mind. Due to the very fact that this sector is separate, it is the common ground of the deceived gaze, and of false consciousness. And the unification it achieves is nothing but an official language of generalized separation. 1967. The unification it achieves is nothing but an official language of generalized separation. So if you zoom out from Twitter, what do you see? Look at the language, not in terms of what it says, but in terms of what it does. What does it do? About half, no, that's probably too much, but much of the stuff that I read on Twitter, and I try to curate my feed so that I don't get too much stuff, is about the medium itself, right? It's the official language of generalized separation. So it's about how bad Twitter is, or can be, or how, like someone I follow, an actor I really liked, the other day posted how Twitter had, what does Twitter do? They what?
Shadow ban?
I don't know, they banned him. So some guy was criticizing this actor I like, Evan Handler, and Evan posted the ban. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So you're really commenting upon the medium here more than this guy who got banned. Right? You're reinforcing the medium. It's an official language of generalized separation. Look, I don't like this guy. This guy was a jerk to me. Look, here it is. You see? Now, for Debord, this is important. This may be the most important thing. The spectacle is not a collection of images. So let's not get that in our minds. Let's not think of it that way. He continues, but a social relation among people mediated by images. The spectacle is not a collection of images, but a social relation among people mediated by images. How do we relate to each other? Through our images that we share. Are they our images? Is it me at the fire festival, you know? Yeah, okay. Is it me at the fire festival? No, because there's 3,700 other images just like that, right? And so I'm participating in this society online or elsewhere. I'm creating a social relation that's mediated by images. He continues, the spectacle presents itself as something that is enormously positive, indisputable, inaccessible. You can't do anything about it. You can only participate in it. It says nothing more than that which appears is good, and that which is good appears.
The appearance, Krishna.
Thank you. Devore continued, the attitude which it demands in principle is a passive acceptance, which is in fact already obtained by its manner of appearing without reply, by its monopoly of appearance. This is really interesting. So we go from being to having to appearing. So it's not even the previous generation's sense of accumulation. It's only appearing. Right? So you can, I'm sorry, I guess this is too easy, but I'm going to keep using it. So you can go to the fire festival and swim with pigs and models.
The pigs will bite the models.
Yeah, the pig, yeah. I don't think the models even showed up, did they? Because they were smarter than anybody. Yeah. This is Devore. The first phase is the domination of the economy over social life is brought into the definition of all human realization, the obvious degradation of being, existing, into having. The present phase of total occupation of social life by the accumulated results of the economy leads to a generalized sliding of having into appearing, from which all actual having must draw its immediate prestige and ultimate function. At the same time, all individual reality has become social reality, right? If you didn't Instagram it, it didn't happen. And in fact, we're told all the time we should create Instagram places here, right? Maybe we should, I don't know, but I'm just saying. With Devore, all individual reality has become social reality, directly dependent on social power and shaped by it. It is allowed to appear only to the extent that it is not, right? So just try to incorporate being into appearing. It doesn't play well. All right, I'm going to skip over some of this because I think you get the point, but let's say a word about power, or let Devore say it. The oldest social specialization, the specialization of power, is at the root of the spectacle. The spectacle is thus a specialized activity which speaks for all the other activities. It is the diplomatic representation of hierarchy, society to itself, where all other expression is banned. Here, the most modern is also the most archaic. He goes on to say that every commodity fights for itself. And so this is where we get tripped up, is we think if I like a certain band and somebody else likes a different band, then I'm an individual. I have unique tastes. And yeah, there's a small group of us, but we're very cultured and we have a very refined palate for music or food or fill in the blank or religion or philosophy. There's us and then there's them. That's how the spectacle gets us, because in fighting for itself, in saying that a certain band is better than another band, and I don't want to be a part of the people who like that other band, we think we're differentiating ourselves.
Just have a cigarette.
Yeah, exactly. Torches of freedom. I teach some 21-year-olds downtown, and they're marvelous. So don't believe the hype. These students are really great, but I mess with them terribly, and I think it's my duty as an older person and a philosopher to mess with them. They're so easy to mess with. So, we talk, it's a philosophy class, so we talk about all this, and they're good cultural people, and they say, well, it's just, I'm my own being, and I do my own thing, and my life is unique in the world, and, that's how I live as myself. I am me. You be you. And I say, well, why do y'all dress the same? Why do y'all talk the same? Why are you here at this school at the same time, in the same place, if you're so unique and individual? Because if you believe that, then you are captured by the larger spectacle. And you feed the larger spectacle in doing so, because you think you are not. You think you've believed the illusion of the spectacle, that you have a self. And that's what this spectacle wants from you, is to sell you a self, a unique self, even though every selfie you take can be found, and we can do this with data mining, can be found all across the world looking exactly the same. You're unique. Yeah, there's nobody else like you. All right. De Boer said that art is dead. After Dadaism, it's all over. So, and surrealism, so great. He was not a fan of celebrities. We'll see what he says about celebrities here. Yes. As embodiments of the spectacle, celebrities necessarily renounce all autonomous qualities in order to identify with the general law of obedience to the course of things. Their individuality is sacrificed in order to become a figurehead of the profit-driven system. After all, celebrities not only peddle commodities, but are themselves commodities. Art is dead. Let's see. What he wanted to do, and what La Society tried to do, was break up the continuity of the spectacle. Not by saying, hey, we like this certain thing and they don't, but to kind of culture jam the whole mechanism. And so you get images like this one. Juxtaposition, radical juxtaposition. He called it diversion or detour, rerouting, hijacking. Anyway, did it work? I don't know. We're talking about it tonight, so that's pretty cool. But I don't think it worked overall. And in fact, De Boer would eventually just kind of give up and drink himself to death in what he called a long, slow suicide. Yeah, I know, I'm sorry. But I'm not going to end on that. I'm not pandering. Whenever I do these, I try to find something from Manly Hall, if I can, that might be helpful. I really needed it tonight, because that's a dark place to go, Society of the Spectacle, because there's really no way out except to keep using the spectacle against itself in some way that never succeeds, ultimately. And so I found, this is 1958, right around Society of the Spectacle, about 9 years before it, a little article in one of his journals called Horizon, called Psychological Advertising. And I just want to read some of what Manly Hall says about psychological advertising, this 1958, this new phenomenon. that's happening, right? So and then I'll close with this. He says this, according to recent reports, business organizations, 1958, throughout the country are creating or supporting research groups not only to psychoanalyze public opinion, but to strongly condition this opinion for private advantage and profit. All right? And he says, I'm not a big fan of ethics, frankly, myself, in the larger scheme of things, because I think it's a second order thing that comes after a sacred experience. But it can be, Manly Hall reminded me, it does have its place and its function, because it can protect you against these forces. Maybe it's the only thing, one of the only things that can protect you against these forces arrayed against you. He says this, it may be true that it is valuable and important to find out what people really want, but knowledge in any field brings with it ethical responsibility. To preserve an economy, we must also have the courage to provide what is needed. We cannot continuously cater to public opinion if this is contrary to individual and collective security. Man is not entitled to everything that he wants. We are not entitled to everything that we want. For his own peace of mind, man must be encouraged to develop sufficient discrimination to know what he can afford in order that he may live within his means. This is almost quaint, isn't it? He may live within his means and with a minimum, here we go, of personal anxiety. The use of psychological knowledge to overstimulate impractical attitudes. Overstimulating impractical attitudes will ultimately endanger the structure of our national economy. So he's talking about as below, so above kind of thing. So, what happens to you personally also happens to the larger system. It would seem, he continues, that the structure of modern ethics is inadequate to cope with the pressures of the profit system. So he recognizes ethics as a general failure in light of these larger forces. We must conclude, he says, that those responsible have not been properly indoctrinated with the nobler sentiments of the race. Because that's how we talked back then, the nobler sentiments of the race. The human race, he means. They have not been properly indoctrinated. If this is due to lack of adequate ethical and moral instruction in our educational institutions, it's time to remedy this deficiency. He calls for an economic policy of peace and justice and practicality. Living as we do, he says, in uncertain and intranquil times, we have mortgaged our futures to the degree that health and happiness are undermined. It's not unusual today, this is 1958, I love this. It's not unusual today for a family of four with $400 in the bank, which according to, you saw that recent study, the average American, if he or she has a $400 expense, is done. Unexpected expense. Did you read that? Maybe you experienced that. It's not unusual today for a family with $400 in the bank to owe $10,000 to $20,000. Conservatively speaking, high wages and continuous employment must be assured for the next 15 to 25 years. Oh, Manly. Now it's our lifetimes. We don't ever get to stop working. It is still possible, Manly Hall says, for the provident person to make certain individual decisions. He can use his mind to curb his instincts and remain solvent. Can such a person resist scientific undermining of his common sense? That's the issue, isn't it? Edward Bernays. Can such a person resist a scientific undermining of his common sense? Against him are groups of experts who have available to them the information necessary to undermine his personal psychological integration. This is a religious problem. This is a psychological problem, he's saying. even without our own knowledge and certainly without our consent. Everyone has a breaking point. Resolutions are usually not so strong that they cannot ultimately be shaken. It's not very pleasant to realize that, it's not very pleasant, I love it, to realize that highly paid scientists are being engaged to discover our weaknesses and play upon them. And all hints of sorcery. The modern version of medieval necromancy. Less spectacular, he continues, but actually equally insidious is the psychoanalysis of the composite public mind for purposes of exploitation. The moment we use superior knowledge to exploit ignorance or the relative lack of knowledge, we are again approaching the precincts of sorcery. The only proper end of knowledge is that it shall be used for the common good. Otherwise, it has no justification. The consumer is thus gradually becoming the victim of strategy and high places. And finally, we cannot cure a situation of this kind by simply letting it take its course. And I know for me, that's the sense, is like I exceed, I give up, and I'm like, I kind of watch it like it's going by me when in fact I'm in the stream myself. We cannot cure a situation of this kind by simply letting it take its course or attempting to put off the evil day with artificial stimulants.
Right.
Many an exhausted executive has resorted to alcohol only to end as an alcoholic, with his abilities further impoverished. It may sound platitudinous, but the answer lies in the neglected fields of religion, philosophy, and ethics. We have tried in every possible way, and this is what the spectacle does, we have tried in every possible way to evade the basic issue, but as always, we have tried in vain. No problem can be solved until man becomes wiser and better than the problem. No institution is so vast or so prosperous that it can escape from the censorship of right principle. In every walk of life, overemphasis upon competitive policies brings tragedy. Overemphasis upon competitive policies brings tragedy. It is the human being and not our institutions who must receive first consideration. Everything possible should be done to make our lives secure and to free us from material hazards which interfere with our growth and development as people. The purpose of business is to serve the human need and to make available to us those commodities and services which protect us and promote our welfare. A policy which affirms that man is merely a creature to be preyed upon and to be ruthlessly exploited is not essentially different from a political dictatorship or a religious tyranny. Manly Palmer Hall. We don't have to succumb to these forces. The forces, the spectacle can tell us that there's no point, that all that you can do is replicate the spectacle. You can keep replicating it, thinking that you're being innovative, creative, unique in the world, an individual, when in fact you can actually still be an individual and make decisions, including rejecting the things that hurt you and harm you, and in fact harm all of us, and you can accept the things that edify, that build up, that give life. You can do that. So can I. Thank you for listening. I thought this was such an important piece. And again, you won't find this anywhere except in the journal. I made some copies for you if you like. And, yeah.